The monitor screams in clean, mechanical pulses while his chest barely remembers how to rise. And I'm already counting the seconds between breaths, like they're coins I can't afford to waste. His eyes fogged, for years snap into focus on mine. And his fingers clamp my wrist with a strength that doesn't belong to a dying man. "Nurse," he rasps, each syllable scraping like sandpaper. "I remember. All of it." Then he swallows blood-tinged saliva, pulls me closer, and whispers where the body has been for 20 years right as the line on the screen starts to flatten. And my mind drags us back to how he arrived tonight. The night shift in the ER has its own smell bleach that never quite wins against. Old coffee and human fear and it clings to the back of my throat the way guilt does when you swallow it instead of saying it out loud. The automatic doors keep coughing people into our world. A kid with a split lip. An old man clutching his ribs. A woman whose mascara has made dark rivers down her cheeks. Monitors chirp in overlapping rhythms. We'll squeal over tile seams. And somewhere, behind the curtain line, a doctor snaps for a blood gas, like it's a cup of sugar. I pin my badge straight without thinking. The same small ritual I do when I need to pretend I'm in control. Then step back into the current of the department and let it carry me. We got him from a nursing facility just after midnight, the kind of place that always sounds calm when they call because the chaos is so routine it becomes polite. Advanced Alzheimer's, the report said, like those 2 words explain everything you might find inside a person. Declining for days, not eating, more somnolent. Family wants him evaluated. The paramedics rolled him in under a thin gray blanket that barely warmed the waxy pallor of his skin. And the fluorescent lights in the bay turned his face into something half-finished. He wasn't old in the way some patients are old loud with stories. Stubborn with pride, he was old like a book left open in the rain, swollen, softened, pages stuck together. His eyes drifted past me as if I were furniture. His daughter trailed the stretcher like a shadow, trying to keep up with the person who cast it, her hands twisting a paper cup until the rim collapsed. She looked like someone who had been bracing for impact for years, and the impact had finally arrived, not in one violent crash but in 1,000 small dents. He was a good father, she said before I even asked a question, as if she'd rehearsed it for whoever wore my scrubs. Behind her, a man husband, brother. Maybe just family by exhaustion kept his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jump near his ear. They had that look I see all the time in relatives of dementia patients. Grief that can't settle because the person is still breathing. I guided them to the side, because families always think standing closer will keep death away, and because I needed room to work. "I'm going to ask a few quick questions," I said, keeping my voice low, steady, the way we're trained to sound when we're the first hand on the rope. "Does he have an advance directive? DNR? Anything in writing?" The daughter blinked hard, as if the words were bright lights. He never wanted to talk about it," she whispered. "But he wouldn't want. Not like this." She looked back at him, at the man who had become a body wearing her memories, and her face did something complicated. Love trying to stay loyal while surrender crawled up behind it. In the bay, the resident started the initial assessment, and I fell into the familiar choreography. Oxygen, vitals, for access, labs, EKG leads like cold coins on his chest. His blood pressure was low enough to make me taste metal. His heart rate wasn't fast. It was tired. When I spoke to him, I got the usual nothing, no recognition, no irritation, not even the reflex of pretending. His mouth hung slightly open, a thread of saliva at the corner, and his hands trembled with that fine, purposeless shaking that looks like a body searching for a signal it can't find. The doctor asked him to squeeze fingers. He didn't. Asked him his name. He stared past the ceiling tiles like the answers were hiding up there. But then, as I adjusted the pulse oximeter, his eyes slid to me, not through me, not over me, but to me, and for a fraction of a second something human flared behind them. It wasn't clarity, not yet. It was the smallest acknowledgement that another person existed at the edge of his world. I've learned to respect those moments because they vanish if you chase them too hard. "I'm David," I told him softly, because saying your name is sometimes the first donation you can make to someone who's lost theirs. "I'm your nurse tonight." I didn't expect a response. I just didn't want him to be a body surrounded by strangers, if there was any part of him left that could still feel alone. The daughter watched every movement I made, like it might either save him or expose how unsavable he was. And I caught her eyes more than once. "We're doing everything we can," I said, "because it's what families need to hear, even when it's also what we tell ourselves." She nodded too quickly. "He was a teacher," she blurted, words spilling out like she'd been holding them back. "History. He knew everything. He could remember dates like they were songs." Her laugh cracked halfway, and she pressed her knuckles to her lips. "Now, he doesn't remember my name. Sometimes he thinks I'm his sister." The attending ordered imaging. "Broad labs, fluids, antibiotics, because in the AU, treat first and name the monster later, and the night kept moving around us." I wheeled him to CT with a transporter while the daughter walked beside the gurney, one hand hovering over the blanket but not touching. Like she was afraid physical contact might prove how little of him was left. In the hallway, the hospital lights turned her skin pale, and she looked suddenly younger, like someone's child again. "He had moments," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the floor as the wheels rattled. "Sometimes he'd look at me and it was like he knew, like he came back for a second." She swallowed. "And then it would be gone." Do you think those moments mean anything? In my job, you learn that people don't ask questions because they want medical facts. They ask because they want permission to feel what they feel. I could have given her the clinical version: fluctuating cognition, sundowning, transient awareness, but that wouldn't touch what she was actually holding. "I think they mean he's still in there somewhere," I said, choosing honesty that wouldn't bruise. "Even if it's just a flicker." She nodded as if I'd handed her something fragile she could keep in her pocket, then glanced at her father and whispered, "Please come back," so softly I wasn't sure she meant for anyone to hear. Back in the bay, his labs returned ugly in the way late-stage decline is ugly, numbers that tell you the body is losing its argument with time, and the resident's face tightened as she read them. We started more fluids, adjusted oxygen, chased pressures that kept slipping. He wasn't crashing dramatically. He was fading, quietly, like a signal dropping bar by bar. The daughter's phone lit up with calls she didn't answer. The man with the clenched jaw finally spoke, voice rough. Is he suffering?" He asked it like an accusation aimed at the universe. The attending answered with careful language about comfort and measures, and I saw the daughter's shoulders slump, not from surprise, but from the relief of hearing the truth said aloud. At around 3 in the morning, I stepped out to grab supplies, and the hallway felt colder than the bay, the kind of cold that wakes you up, even when your body has been awake for too long. My feet ached inside my shoes. The weight of my stethoscope on my neck felt heavier than it should, like it had absorbed every bad outcome from the night and decided to stay. When I came back in, the lights were dimmed, the family sitting close, hands linked like a chain, and the patient's breathing had changed slower, more irregular, each inhale a question mark. That's when it happened. The smallest shift at first, like the air in the room had rearranged itself. His eyes opened wider, and the aimless tremor in his hands stilled. He turned his head toward me with intention, not drift. The daughter leaned forward, hope rising so fast it looked like panic. I stepped closer to adjust his nasal cannula, and his fingers shot out and locked around my wrist. Grip surprisingly firm, skin cool and papery against mine. His gaze pinned me with a focus I hadn't seen in him all night, maybe not in years, and in that moment I felt the strange, almost sacred terror of realizing you're about to meet the person inside the diagnosis. His lips moved, and for the first time, His voice found its way through the fog. "Nurse," he whispered, breath thin but deliberate. "I remember." He swallowed, eyes not leaving mine. I remember what I did. The daughter's face lit up in a way that broke my heart because she thought this was a miracle made for her. I opened my mouth to call the doctor, to bring everyone into the room for this last gift of recognition. And then he tugged me closer like a man sharing a prayer. "Listen," he said, the word landing heavy. "Before I go, you need to know where he is." His grip on my wrist isn't the trembling, searching kind I've seen all night. It's a clamp, purposeful, like he's anchoring himself to the only solid thing left in the room. The monitor's beeps have stretched farther apart, each one arriving late, dragging its feet. And the oxygen hiss at his nostrils sounds suddenly loud, rude, as if it's interrupting something intimate. His eyes don't wander anymore. They burn with a clarity that doesn't fit the fragile geometry of his face. I lean in because that's what you do when someone dying offers you words, and because there's a part of me stupid, human that believes in lost gifts. The daughter shifts forward too, hope rising in her throat like a sob she refuses to release. And I have to lift my free hand in the smallest gesture. Not yet, not this close. Because whatever he's about to say is aimed at me with the precision of a confession. 20 years, he whispers, and the sound is papery, but the sentence has bones. It's been 20 years. My brain tries to place that number on the shelf of medical relevance duration of symptoms. Time since diagnosis. Years of teaching history before Alzheimer's took him, but the way he says, it is not clinical. It's penitential. The skin around his eyes tightens, as if pain has finally found the correct address. "He didn't. He didn't go missing," he says, and my stomach drops before my mind can catch up. The daughter inhales sharply, a quick, bright breath like the first note of a song she recognizes. And she squeezes her own hands together as if praying the rest will be her name. Her childhood nickname, anything that proves he came back to love her one last time. Instead, he swallows again, and the swallow is wet, difficult, as if the body is already trying to pull the plug while the soul keeps talking. The resident steps in with a syringe of pressor-ready medication, her eyes flicking from the BP cuff to his asystole tempting rhythm. And I can feel the boundary tighten, the thin line between medicine and whatever this is. The attending is on the other side of the curtain giving orders, in that clipped tone that means we are losing ground. He's peri-arrest. Someone mutters, and the words hit the air like a verdict. I should be calling out vitals, checking for patency, preparing for chest compressions, living in the algorithm that keeps my hands useful. Instead, I'm frozen by a sentence forming inside a dying man's mouth. His fingers tug me closer. "Under the shed," he says, each word pushed out with effort, as if his lungs are offended by the work of truth. At the lake house. My heart stutters in sympathy or terror. Lake house? Shed? Under. The brain loves turning horror into coordinates because coordinates are manageable. The daughter's face tilts, confused now, the miracle slipping. "Dad," she whispers, "what are you talking about?" But he doesn't look at her. He looks through her, past her, like she's an interruption to something he's been holding for decades. There's a cruelty in that, accidental but sharp, and I see her expression fracture, hope to bewilderment to the first flare of fear. "Stop," the man with the clenched jaw says, stepping forward, voice low and warning. "What is this?" He's not asking medically. He's asking as a person who can feel the room turning. The attending pushes into the bay, takes one look at the monitor, and says, "We need to move," and then catches the daughter's face. The family's confusion, the patient's grip on my wrist like a drowning man holding a secret. "David," she says to me, not unkindly, but with command. "Step back. We need to focus. The algorithm, the job, the only thing that makes sense in the face of death." I nod automatically, but my body doesn't obey because his fingers are still around my pulse, and I can't tell if he's stealing my time or giving me his. He breathes in, shallow, and his eyes flicker as if the light behind them is struggling with the power outage. He's there. He insists. I did it. I put him there. And in the space after that sentence, the room becomes a different place. It isn't just an abbey anymore. It's a confessional, a courtroom, a grave. The daughter makes a sound I've only heard from people when the ground under their life shifts, and they realize they've been standing on a lie. No, she says. But it's not denial yet, it's an attempt to rewind time by force of will. No, you're sick. You're confused. He doesn't know what he's saying. She looks at me, eyes wide, begging. It's the look families give when they want you to pick which reality becomes official. My mouth goes dry. I can taste the antiseptic in the air and the stale coffee on my own breath. And suddenly I'm aware of every sensory detail as if my brain is trying to anchor itself. The scratch of my gloves, the heat of the monitor screen, the squeal of a gurney wheel in the hallway, a baby crying to baze down, alive and furious at the world. I want to say something that will put this back in the box. Label it delirium, terminal agitation, a hallucination from a hypoxic brain. But his gaze is so steady, so accusingly lucid, that my usual mental escape routes collapse. If this is delirium, it's the most coherent delirium I've ever met. If it's truth, it's arriving too late to be useful and too sharp to be kind. Sir, I whisper, because I don't know what else to call him. And because Mr. feels too respectful and that is not mine to use. Why are you telling me this now? He blinks slowly, and the blink looks like a goodbye. Because he starts, then coughs, a wet rattle that makes the attending's head snap back to the monitor. The resident is already pushing fluids faster, and someone has pads ready, the defib card inching closer like a threat. The family hears none of it. They're trapped in the words. Because he finishes, she deserves. Not to love a ghost. His eyes flick toward his daughter for the first time, and in that glance I see something that could be love or could be desperation wearing love's mask. I'm sorry, he breathes, and the apology lands in the room and doesn't know where to go. The attending's voice cuts through the moment. We're losing him. David, I need you. The clinical world insists. I turn my head. He's bleaching half one part of the Rieman's confession, the other snapping back to training. I call out his blood pressure, barely a number now on. The resident says, starting Norepi, and the attending says, get ready to intubate if he tanks. And my hands finally move because moving is safer than thinking. The daughter's voice rises, panicked. What did he do? She demands, tears spilling now. What is he talking about? Tell me. She reaches for him, but the man with the clenched jaw catches her elbow gently. Restraining her like you restrain someone about to touch a hot stove. And then the patient's grip loosens not because he chooses to let go, but because his muscles are surrendering. His fingers slide down my wrist, leaving a cold trail of sweat, and for one raw second I feel the absence of his hand like a bruise forming. His eyes start the focus wobbling, and his mouth opens as if he has one more detail to give, one more coordinate to pin his sin to the earth. The boards, he tries. The third, he never finishes. His chest stutters. The monitor's beeping changes pitch, turns urgent, the kind of alarm that hijacks every conversation. Someone calls, he's bradying down. And the attending says, check a pulse, and I'm already there. Fingers at his carotid, feeling for the smallest insistence of life. Nothing. Or maybe something so faint it's wishful thinking. No pulse, I hear myself say, and the words are blunt, practical, obscene in their timing. The daughter makes a sound that is half scream, half prayer, and I want to look at her, to be human for her. But my body is already stepping into the choreography of resuscitation. The resident climbs onto the stool. Starting compressions, she announces, and her hands begin the violent mercy of CPR. pushing down on his sternum in a rhythm that drowns out the confession still echoing in my head. The first crack of a rib is soft, almost polite, but it turns my stomach anyway. We do this to save people, and sometimes it feels like punishment. Epinephrine, 1 milligram, the attending orders, and the syringe plunges like a promise we've made to many times. The defib pads are cold on his chest. The monitor shows a flat line that doesn't care about secrets or daughters or lake houses. I'm bagging him now, squeezing air into lungs that don't want it, watching his chest rise and fall like a puppet performance for a god who might be asleep. The daughter is sobbing behind the curtain line. Her words a slurry of daddy and please and no, and the man with the clenched jaw is holding her up because grief makes legs unreliable. Over all of it, the department noise continues, as if indifferent, gurneys rolling. Phones ringing, someone laughing too loudly at the desk because coping wears strange faces. 2 minutes, another round, another dose. We work with a kind of grim tenderness, because even in the violence of resuscitation there's respect. We line up our hands. Cut without, we refute with "Samo essa la chance." But every time I glance at his face, I see the ghost of that lucid stare. The one that locked onto me and said, in effect, "I'm giving you something you didn't ask for and can't unhear." It's in my skin now, that confession, like the smell of bleach that never leaves your fingers after a shift. Any rhythm change. The attending asks. The resident shakes her head, sweat shining at her hairline. Ishchu, assistantly, the attending's eyes flick toward the family. Toward the daughter's collapsed posture. Toward the way her entire life seems to be folding inward. "One more round," she says, but her voice is already softening into the shape of an ending. I swallow hard, keep bagging, keep counting. I can't stop seeing the shed, the lake house, the word under, and I can't stop hearing his unfinished sentence. The third, like a door left ajar, in a dark hallway. When the attending finally calls time of death, the room doesn't exhale. It just goes quiet in a way that feels unnatural, like the hospital itself is holding its breath to listen for what comes next. The resident steps back, hands trembling, and the only sound is the monitor's steady, merciless tone. I pull the sheet up to the man's chin with a gentleness that feels inadequate, and I realize my wrist still tingles where his fingers held me. The daughter stumbles forward, and the attending meets her with practiced compassion, explaining, offering, guiding, but the daughter's eyes keep darting to me as if I'm carrying something she can sense, but not name. I want to say he told me where a body is. I want to say your father came back just long enough to shatter you. Instead, I stand there with my gloves on and my heart pounding and my mouth full of silence, because the crisis didn't end when his heart stopped. It only changed shape, and now it lives inside the one person in the room who heard the map to a grave. I've always hated the moment after a code ends, not because it's quiet, but because it's loud in all the places sound can't reach. The team disperses in small, efficient movements. Someone returns the crash cart. Someone documents times and doses. Someone peels off gloves with the snap of latex and tries not to meet anyone's eyes. The bay looks almost the same as it did 30 minutes ago, but it's become a museum of a life that just ended. Empty syringes, torn packaging, the dent in the mattress where we fought for him. The monitor is silenced, yet the phantom tone lingers in my skull like tinnitus. I wash my hands too long, scrubbing as if friction could remove words. The daughter sits in the family alcove with a social worker, shoulders hunched, staring at a styrofoam cup she hasn't touched. Her mascara is gone now, wiped away by grief, and without it she looks younger, rawer. Like the adult version of her is peeling off under stress. The man with the clenched jaw, her husband. I realize when he rubs circles on her back with the intimacy of years keeps scanning the room as if looking for the person to blame. Their world has narrowed to a single event, her father's death. They don't know it also narrowed to a sentence. He slipped into my bloodstream on the way out. I step into the alcove because it's my job to check on them, to offer next steps, to make the hospital's bureaucracy feel less like a second assault. "I'm sorry," I say, and the words sound flimsy even to me. The daughter lifts her head, eyes swollen, and for a moment I see the old hope still twitching, refusing to accept reality. He knew you," she whispers. For a second, I saw it. Her voice breaks like glass. "That meant something, right?" I nod because denying her that Sliver would be cruel. "It meant he was there," I say. "With you." It's true, and it's also not the whole truth. And the part I leave out sits heavy in my throat. Her husband leans forward. "What was he saying?" he asks, and his tone is controlled. Too controlled. About a lake house, a shed. He sounded wrong. The daughter flinches at the memory like it's a second death. I feel my pulse jump. This is the first time the dilemma shows its teeth. If I answer, I open a door that cannot be closed. If I don't, I become complicit in burying something alive. "He was very ill," I say carefully. Sometimes people say things at the end that don't make sense. The husband's eyes narrow. Not satisfied, because he heard the coherence in the old man's voice, too. The daughter grips the cup so hard it creaks. I excuse myself with promises of paperwork and condolences. But really I'm fleeing to the med room because it's the only place I can be alone with the noise in my head. The fluorescent light in there is harsh, unforgiving, and the refrigerator hum feels accusatory. I rest my hands on the counter, and I can still feel his fingers around my wrist, the cold insistence of them. Under the shed, at the lake house, the boards. The third, coordinates without a compass. A confession without a signature. My brain tries to do what it always does, turn emotion into procedure, report to charge nurse, inform attending. Call security, call police. But this isn't a misplaced wallet or a weapon in a backpack. It's a statement that could destroy a family's memory of a man they just lost. Terminal lucidity is real enough to be whispered about in hospitals like folklore, those moments when a person who's been gone for months, years, suddenly returns, speaks clearly, offers a goodbye that feels like mercy. I've seen it once, before. A woman with metastatic cancer who hadn't recognized her son for weeks suddenly sat up, called him by name, and told him she was proud of him. Then died before the sun rose. We like those stories. They give us the illusion that the mind has a hidden emergency generator, that love can flick the lights back on at the end. But what if the generator powers regret instead of love? What if the last clarity isn't a gift but a debt collector? I pull up his chart on the computer because it's the only anchor I have. Facts. Advanced Alzheimer's. DNR not formally documented, but family preference toward comfort measures. Nursing facility notes. No mention of a lake house. No mention of anything violent. Of course there wouldn't be. Crimes don't usually come with problem lists, and I CD codes. I stare at his demographics. Name, age, address, emergency contact his daughter. Under occupation, it says teacher, and the word feels like a cruel joke. History teacher, she'd said. A man who knew dates like songs. A man who, at the end, sang me something else entirely. The attending finds me there, and she doesn't have to ask twice to see something is off. "You okay?" she says, leaning against the doorway, her voice softened by fatigue. She's been through more deaths than I've had birthdays, and she still looks at each one like it matters. I hesitate, the way you hesitate at the edge of a cliff when you can't tell if the fall will kill you or finally make you honest. He said something, I admit. Before we lost him, she watches me with that calm, waiting attention doctors use when they already suspect the answer will be ugly. What kind of something? She asks. I tell her the bare bones, because dressing it up would only make it worse. He said, 20 years. He said the missing person didn't go missing. He said he put him under a shed at a lake house, The words sound insane out loud, like if a dream turned into report. Tending a si fascis. Not shock, something more complicated. Recognition of a moral emergency. Did he say a name? She asks. I shake my head. No, he didn't finish. He said, the boards, the third, and then he arrested. Silence stretches between us. In the quiet, the refrigerator hum becomes the only witness. We have to consider delirium, she says slowly, and I can hear her trying to build a bridge back to safety. Hypoxia can cause, she stops, because we both heard the coherence. But we also can't ignore a potential confession to homicide. Her eyes lift to mine. David, this is serious. I nod, because the word serious is too small, but it's all we have. What do? I ask, and the question is a confession of my own. I'm not ready for the weight he handed me. She rubs her forehead, exhaustion carving deeper lines. Ethically, we don't keep crimes secret, she says. But we also have obligations to previs to the family, and to not cause harm based on unreliable statements. She pauses, and her voice turns quieter, almost human in the way medicine sometimes forgets to be. He's dead. He can't clarify. He can't be questioned. And you just told me the daughter is fragile. She glances toward the door as if she can see the family through walls. If you tell police and it's false, you've detonated their grief for nothing. If it's true and you keep it quiet, you become part of it. The charge nurse walks by in the hallway, laughing at something someone said, and the sound feels obscene. Life keeps moving. People keep joking. Meanwhile, I'm standing in a med room holding a secret like a biohazard. I think about the daughter's face when she said, he was a good father. I think about the way her hope lit up when he looked at me with clarity. If I call the police, she will learn her father's last coherent act may have been to confess murder. That knowledge will stain every memory she has, every childhood photo, every I love you he ever said. But if I don't call, and there's a body somewhere bones under boards, waiting for a name then a family out there has been waiting 20 years for closure, and I'm deciding their pain is less important than hers. Privacy laws swirl in my mind like a fog. What can I disclose? What must I disclose? What should I disclose? Hospitals train us in compliance, in what not to say in elevators, in how charts aren't gossip. But no training module prepares you for this. A dying man placing a map to a grave in your hand and closing his eyes before you can refuse it. The attending suggests we involve risk management, ethics, maybe the hospital's legal team. But it's 3 in the morning and those words feel like calling ghosts. If you go to police, she says, you need to document exactly what he said, exactly what you heard, and the circumstances. She studies me. But I'm not going to pretend I know what the right answer is in your gut. I leave the med room with my hands shaking. Not from adrenaline now, but from the slow dread of consequence. In the corridor, I catch a glimpse of the daughter through the glass, her head on her husband's shoulder, her body folded in on itself, small in her grief. The social worker hands her tissues. She nods mechanically. She is living the normal tragedy of losing a parent. I am carrying something abnormal, something that will either rot inside me or infect everyone it touches. And when her husband looks up and meets my eyes, there's a flash of suspicion there is, if he already knows the last words of a dying man can change the living. I walk toward the charting station because I need to do something with my hands. My fingers hover over the keyboard. Document, report, protect, harm, truth, mercy, the cursor blinks like a heartbeat on a screen, steady, indifferent. If I type it, it becomes real. If I don't, it still is. The dilemma isn't only whether to validate a terminal confession or spare a family trauma. It's whether I'm allowed to decide what kind of pain gets to exist in the world. The cursor keeps blinking at me like it's daring me to make the first move. And the longer I stare at it, the more I realize this isn't a writing problem. It's a wound looking for a place to open. Behind me, the keeps, breathing phones ringing, voices rising and falling. The squeal of a stretcher wheel that needs oil, while inside my chest everything has tightened into a single, thin wire. One type of few neutral lines about the code, the time of death, the family present, the comfort offered, and then my hands hover again, suspended over the keys, where one sentence could change the shape of the next 20 years, for more than one family. A confession isn't like a symptom you can treat and move on from. It's a thing that stays, a parasite of truth that needs a host. The attending stands near the workstation, not crowding me but not leaving either, her arms folded in a way that says she's bracing for impact too. If you're going to report it, she says quietly, do it cleanly. Don't editorialize. Just what you heard, verbatim, and the context. Her eyes soften. And if you're not, then we need to be honest about why. The charge nurse calls her name from down the hall, and she doesn't answer. For a moment, it's just the two of us, and that blinking cursor. And I hate that I'm grateful someone else knows, because now the secret has teeth and 2 sets of fingerprints. When I finally stand up, I don't go to the family alcove. I don't go to the break room. I walk to the supply closet at the end of the pod like my feet remember where to hide better than my mind does. The door clicks shut behind me and the air is warmer, thick with plastic and gauze and antiseptic. And I press my forehead to the metal shelving until the cold bites. I see his face again, those sudden clear eyes. The way he pulled me in as if he could transfer the burden like a blood transfusion, and I hear the unfinished sentence. The boards. The third, it's the kind of fragment that becomes an obsession because it feels solvable if you worry it hard enough. Like a loose tooth you can't stop touching with your tongue. A soft knock makes me flinch. The door opens and the daughter stands there, half lit by the hallway, her eyes swollen and red, her hair falling out of its neatness as if grief has hands. She's alone now. The husband must be filling out paperwork or making calls or just trying to breathe somewhere else. I'm sorry, she says, and the apology is absurd. The way people apologize when they don't know what to do with their own pain. They said you were his nurse. Her voice shakes. He grabbed you. Like he recognized you. She swallows, and her throat works hard around the words. What did he say? The question lands in the closet like a dropped instrument. I feel my pulse in my fingertips. Every answer available to me is a kind of violence. Tell her the truth and fracture her father permanently. Lie and become a gatekeeper to someone else's closure. Dodge and let the suspicion rot between us. He was very sick. I start, and I can hear how cowardly it sounds even as it leaves my mouth. Her eyes sharpen with sudden clarity that mirrors his. And for a heartbeat it feels like the disease has jumped Bodder's lucidity from him to her, an instinct that something important was exchanged. Don't do that, she whispers. Please, I can handle it. I've handled years of losing him in pieces. If he came back for a second, I need to know what that second was. Outside the closet, a code alarm doesn't ring. No one shouts for help. And that silence is what makes this moment feel like the real emergency of the night. I imagine her going home with a half-truth, replaying the scene until she invents something kinder than reality. I imagine her finding out later from a detective, from a news story, from a phone call that arrives like a slap that her father's last lucid act was a confession, and I see how that delayed impact would bruise her in a place she can't protect. Protect the family from a trauma, Taddeo. She had asked without knowing she was asking. The words, I remember everything seconds before leaving, turn in my mind. And I understand now how cruel the title is. Memory returning not to comfort, but to condemn. I can't talk about specifics. I say, and my voice sounds like policy. Like hiding behind the hospital's rules because they're sturdier than my conscience. Her expression collapses, not into anger, but into abandonment, like she's being left alone in a room she already can't survive. So it was bad, she says, and it isn't a question. She wraps her arms around herself, as if holding her ribs together will keep her heart from spilling out. Was he scared? She asks, smaller now. Was he sorry? That's the one question I can answer without detonating everything, and it still feels like walking on glass. I think of his eyes, the way they held mine like a plea, the apology that came out of him like a final bloodletting. Yes, I say he sounded sorry. It's true. It's also incomplete in the way all survivable truths are incomplete. She nods slowly, and tears spill over again. And for a moment she just stands there and lets the grief do what grief does, break the body into softer shapes. Then she lifts her eyes and her voice changes, turns hard with need. My dad wasn't a monster, she says, as if saying it will make it a fact. He wasn't. He wasn't. The husband's voice calls her name from the hallway, and she flinches like she's been caught stealing something, then turns to leave. At the door, she pauses with her back to me. Whatever he said, she murmurs, please, don't let it be the last thing that happens to us. She slips out and the door clicks shut again. And I'm alone with the shelves, and the antiseptic, and the sudden realization that my decision is no longer abstract. The family has sensed it. The secret is already leaking into their grief, staining it with the shape of a shadow they can't name. When I step back into the hallway, the attending is waiting. Her posture telling me she's been watching the current shift and the undercurrent both. She asked, I say, and the words come out flat, like I'm reporting a lab value. The attending's jaw tightens. And? She asks. I shake my head. I didn't tell her. My stomach twists because it feels like I'm confessing to cowardice, or maybe it's restraint. Or maybe those are the same thing in different uniforms. The attending exhales slowly, then nods toward the consult room. We need to decide now, she says. Not tomorrow. Not after you've slept and the story has had time to morph in your head. In the consult room. The walls are a neutral beige designed to make emotions look less dramatic, but nothing can do that. The attending dials a number: hospital administration, security, someone with authority, and as it rings, I realize the decision is no longer just mine. I could stop her. I could tell her not to. I could insist it's delirium, a dying brain firing random guilt into the air. I could protect the daughter's last, clean memory of her father. My hand hovers near the phone like I might reach out and cut the cord. But then I see another image, an empty bedroom somewhere, a family that has waited 20 years for the missing person to walk through a door that will never open, the slow torture of not knowing where to bury their hope. The call connects. The attending speaks, carefully, clinically, as if she's delivering a fragile specimen. We had a patient expire, she says, who, immediately prior to arrest, made a statement indicating knowledge of a possible homicide and the location of remains. My chest tightens on the word homicide, because naming it makes it real. She turns to me. David will provide an exact account, she adds, and my mouth goes dry. This is the moment the story steps off the edge and commits to gravity. Security arrives first, then a hospital administrator whose badge says risk, as if the word itself is a job. They ask me to repeat what I heard. I do, as close to verbatim as my memory allows, and each repetition feels like I'm carving the words into stone, under the shed, at the lake house, the boards. The third, someone writes it down. Someone asks, did he name a victim? No. Did he name himself? He said, I did it. Did he name an address? Damn. They look at each other with that expression professionals wear when they're deciding how much human damage is acceptable in service of the truth. Then the police arrive, not in a dramatic stampede, but in the quiet competence of two detectives who have seen enough grief to respect the room's temperature. They introduce themselves, offer condolences, then ask me to start from the beginning. I tell them about the lucidity, the grip on my wrist, the coherence. I tell them the exact phrases. When I mention the daughter, one of them glances down at his notebook, and I can see the calculation, family notification, collateral trauma, procedural necessity. The detective asks, "Are there any family members here right now?" The answer hangs in the air like a scalpel, yes, and they're already broken. The husband is in the hallway when the detectives step out, and he sees the badges and his face changes in a way that's almost instantaneous confusion. Then understanding, then rage trying to mask fear. What is this? He demands, stepping between them in the alcove like a shield. The daughter appears behind him, and when she sees the detectives, her body goes rigid, as if the truth has finally put on a uniform. She looks at me over his shoulder, and in her eyes I see the moment her last hope dies, not the hope that her father could live, but the hope that his death could be simple. I feel my lungs forget how to work. I want to say I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, but apologies are useless at the moment a life splits in two. One detective speaks, gently, explaining that they need to ask a few questions, that something was said at the end, that they're obligated to follow up. The daughter's gaze locks on mine like a hand around a wrist. "You did it," she whispers, voice shaking with betrayal. "You brought them." Her husband turns his head, eyes burning. And in that look I feel the full weight of the decision I made. I chose truth over their peace. And now I have to stand inside the blast radius without pretending I'm innocent. In the distance, a monitor beeps its steady rhythm for some other patient who is still alive. Still fighting, still surrounded by problems we can name and treat. Here, in this hallway, we've stepped into a different kind of medicine. The kind that doesn't involve epinephrine or oxygen but still decides whether people survive what they learn. The detectives ask the daughter for her father's full name, his history, whether he owned a lake house. She shakes her head violently. "No," she says. "No. He was a teacher. He was sick. He didn't. Her voice crumbles, and she looks at me again, desperate now, as if I can reverse time by confessing I made it up. I don't. I can't, because I didn't make it up. Because his lucid eyes are still in mine. Because somewhere, maybe, underboards the third, whatever that means, there might be bones that have been waiting longer than this daughter has been alive. My throat tightens, and all I manage is the ugliest kind of honesty. Silence. And in that silence, the climax completes itself not with a dramatic rescue, but with a choice made in a room that smelled like bleach and coffee, and the last breath of a man who remembered everything only long enough to poison the living. The hallway becomes a narrow tunnel where every sound feels too sharp to survive in. The daughter stands with her arms locked around herself like a brace, her eyes pinned on the detectives as if their badges are the weapon and her father is the victim all over again. Her husband keeps one step ahead of her, speaking for her with that frantic steadiness people borrow when they can't afford to fall apart yet. While the social worker tries to thread compassion through procedure and keep everyone from bleeding out emotionally in public, I watch it all from the edge, and it hits me with a sick clarity that I didn't just report a confession. I rewrote the last chapter of a family's love story while they were still reading the old ending. They take them into a consult room because hospitals hide trauma behind doors the way we hide bodies behind curtains. The detectives are careful, not kind exactly, but disciplined in their gentleness, asking for practical things, addresses, old properties, relatives, anything that can anchor Lake House to an actual map. The daughter shakes her head until it becomes a tremor. "We never had a lake house," she says, and the words sound like a child insisting monsters aren't real. Then, as if her mind is rummaging through decades for something it skipped over, her gaze goes unfocused. "There was a cabin," she whispers, and the room tilts. "Not ours. My uncle's. Upstate. We went once when I was little. Her husband turns toward her like he's seeing her for the first time. You never said, he starts, but stops when her face crumples, because this is not the moment to accuse. It's the moment the past opens its mouth. A nurse from another pod steps in to tell me I have a patient waiting for discharge instructions, and for a second I almost laugh at the absurdity of it. Someone needs me to explain how to take antibiotics, while to feed away a family is learning their dead father may have left a man under boards 20 years ago. The doesn't pause for moral catastrophes. It just stacks them. I nod, then don't move. My feet feel glued, my scrubs suddenly too thin for the cold that's crept into my bones. The attending catches my eye and gives me a small nod that says, "Go do your job. I'll hold the line here." But this is my line too. I'm the one he chose. The detectives ask to speak with the nursing facility to see if the patient ever said anything similar, if there were records of agitation, recurrent phrases, names he repeated. The daughter hears the words nursing facility and flinches, as if they're blaming her for not keeping him at home. "We tried," she says suddenly, voice sharp, defensive. "We tried to take care of him. We did everything." Her husband's hand grips her shoulder. The social worker murmurs reassurance, but the daughter isn't really talking to them. She's talking to the invisible jury that always shows up when people grieve. In her mind, she is already on trial for not preventing whatever this is. The detectives need my written statement, and I sit at a computer with my fingers hovering again. This time, with no illusion that I can back away. I write what I heard, as clean as I can, like it's a medication order. Patient stated, under the shed, at the lake house. He didn't go missing. I did it. The boards, the third immediately prior to cardiac arrest. I include the time, the setting, the fact that his speech was coherent. His gaze directed, his grip firm. I hate myself for how clinical it reads, because it turns a human moment into evidence. But evidence is what they need. And I'm the only bridge between a dying man's last words and whatever truth is buried under them. When I finish mo bavderbredesk, I look down and see a faint reddish mark where his fingers held me, a half-moon imprint like a bruise that hasn't decided what color it wants to be. I think about how we talk about closure in hospitals, closure of wounds, closure of cases, closure as if it's something you can suture shut. This isn't closure. This is an incision that exposes rot and forces everyone to smell it. They let the family stay in a private room while the detectives make calls, and I pass the door twice pretending I have a reason to be in that corridor. The first time, I hear the daughter crying in a way that's almost silent, breathy, as if her body is afraid loud grief will make it more real. The second time, I hear her say, "But he loved me," and her husband answers, "I know," in a voice that sounds like he's trying to believe it as he says it. I stop walking, my palm pressed against the wall. That's the true damage, I realize. Not the possibility that he killed someone, but the contamination of love. Love doesn't disappear, it just becomes complicated, and complicated is harder to carry than loss. Near dawn, the detectives return with a thin thread of direction. The uncle's property existed, yes, and it had a shed. The cabin is still in the family's orbit, now owned by a cousin. There was, 20 years ago, a local missing persons case tied to that area still unresolved, still open enough to ache. They don't say the name in front of the daughter yet, but I can see it in their posture. The story has found a hook in real life. The daughter hears the word missing and makes a sound like she's choking. She presses her hands to her temples. "This can't be real," she whispers. And then, like a reflex, she turns to me again. "Tell them he was confused," she begs. "Tell them it was the disease." Her eyes are not accusing now. They're pleading. She's asking me to become her shield. The attending steps in, voice steady. "We can't know what's true yet," she says. But we can't ignore it. The daughter's face hardens, betrayal resurfacing, and I feel something inside me crack, not because she hates me, but because I understand why. In her mind, I am the person who chose strangers over her. In my mind, I am the person who chose the dead over the living. We are both right. That's what makes it unbearable. When the police finally leave with next steps, the hospital returns to its usual rhythm with the cruel ease of routine. The bed where he died is stripped and remade for someone else. The code cart is restocked. The chart is closed. The department shifts into mourning like nothing happened. But I don't shift. I walk into the staff bathroom and lock the door and stare at myself in the mirror. Under fluorescent light that doesn't forgive, my eyes look older than they did at midnight. I turn on the faucet and let the water run until it's hot, until steam curls up like breath. I scrub my hands again, hard, and the skin turns pink, then raw, and still I can't wash off the feeling of his last grip. When I come back out, the daughter is being escorted out by the social worker, her steps slow, as if she's learning how to walk in a world that has rearranged itself. She sees me and stops. For a moment, I think she spits something at me. A sentence meant to hurt, the way grief sometimes needs to do violence just to feel powerful. Instead, she says, very quietly, if it's true, I don't know who I am. Then she turns away, and I feel the weight of that sentence settle on my shoulders like lead. The resolution isn't that anything is solved. It's that the storm moved on, and it left wreckage behind. The sun is up when I finally step outside, and it feels wrong. The way daylight feels, wrong after a night where someone died and a secret was born. The sky is washed pale, the parking lot damp with early morning condensation, and the air carries that faint city smell exhaust. Wet asphalt, someone's breakfast like the world is insisting on normalcy. I sit in my car, with the engine off and my hands on the steering wheel, and I can't move, because motion would mean the shift is over. And I don't know how to be a person again after what I heard. In the hospital, we talk about compartmentalizing as if the heart comes with drawers, but some nights don't fit. Some nights break the furniture. I keep replaying the exact second his eyes cleared, searching for the seam where medicine ends and something else begins. A dying brain can misfire. Hypoxia can hallucinate. Alzheimer's can scramble time and memory until past and present collide like cars at an intersection. I know all of that. And yet, I also know what it looks like when someone is gone versus when someone returns. That look he gave me wasn't a drift. It was a decision. It was intention. It was, in the strangest and cruelest way, responsibility showing up late to its own life. We like our endings clean in medicine, saved or not saved, discharged or admitted, pulse or no pulse. But the endings that haunt you are the ones that refuse to be a single sentence. That man died, yes, and that is tragic in the normal way. But he also left behind a question that may become a shovel in the dirt. A phone call to a family that has waited 20 years. A set of remains that finally gets a name. If that happens, if bones are found and grief becomes something that can be held in hands instead of an uncertainty, then what he did in his last minute wasn't only selfish. It was restitution, however late, however incomplete. And then there's the daughter. She walked into the asking for mercy in the only form she knew. One last moment of recognition from the father she'd already lost. She got recognition, but it wasn't for her. It was for me, for the world, for the dead, for a truth she never consented to carry. I can't stop thinking about her sentence. If it's true, I don't know who I am. We build ourselves out of the stories we're told about the people who raised us. When those stories change, it isn't just the past that shifts. It's the foundation under your feet. People will argue about what I should have done, because everyone loves ethics when it's theoretical. Protect the family, they'll say. Respect privacy, they'll say. Or the opposite, report it. No matter what, because the dead deserve justice and the living deserve answers. The truth is uglier in that moment. There was no decision that didn't hurt someone who didn't deserve it. That's what a real dilemma is. Not a puzzle with a correct solution, but a choice between harms when you're already exhausted and your hands still smell like antiseptic and loss. I think about the missing person's family, whoever they are. Eating dinner for 20 years, with an empty chair that never becomes fully symbolic because hope is stubborn. I imagine a mother folding laundry while wondering if her child is cold. A brother checking the news every anniversary. A spouse eventually remarrying but keeping the old numbers saved in the phone. If there is a body under board somewhere, then every day it stayed hidden was another day of slow torture for strangers I've never met. I didn't protect them by keeping quiet. I would have protected only one family, and only in the short term, by letting another family's pain continue indefinitely. And I think about myself, which feels selfish, but it's unavoidable. The first time I became a nurse, I thought my job was to fight death. Later, I learned it's to fight suffering. Now, I understand there's a kind of suffering you can't fight with hands or medications or protocols. You can only witness it and choose what you can live with afterward. When he gripped my wrist, he didn't just ask me to listen. He drafted me into the aftermath of a crime I never committed, into grief I never earned, into consequences I'll carry long after the chart is closed. The detectives will dig. The legal teams will debate. The family will either fracture or find a way to stitch themselves into a new shape. Maybe they'll uncover nothing and I'll have detonated their grief for a ghost. Maybe they'll uncover everything and the daughter will have to hold to truths at once, that her father loved her and that he did something unforgivable. People think those truths can't coexist. They can. They do. That's the tragedy of being human. We're capable of tenderness and cruelty in the same lifetime, sometimes in the same breath. Before I start the car, I finally look down at my wrist where the mark has begun to fade. It's just skin. It will heal. But I know what scars really are in this work. They aren't always visible. Sometimes they're the moments you remember at odd hours, the way a smell can pull you back into a room you thought you'd left. Sometimes they're the questions that follow you home and sit at your kitchen table like an uninvited guest. And sometimes they're the knowledge that the hospital is where masks fall off. Yes, but sometimes what's underneath is not a brave face or a noble goodbye. Sometimes it's the truth, raw and late, arriving with just enough time to change everything. If there's a lesson in it, it isn't neat. It's this: we don't get to choose what someone's final lucidity is used for. We only get to choose what we do when it happens in our hands. That night, I learned that mercy and justice aren't enemies. They're twins that demand payment in different currencies. And I learned that the hardest part of being a healer isn't losing patients. It's surviving what they leave behind.